Happy Wednesday, all. Thank you ever so much again to Jack for joining us on the JLX Friends Benefits podcast. I hope everyone is having a fantastic day so far, or if they're just starting the day, obviously have a good day up ahead. So we're going to dive in as we usually would. I'm going to kick us off this week with something that I'm excited about. Jack and I were just discussing this a little bit off air and thought that, hey, it might be something that is interesting to you guys, and we're going to bounce back and forwards on that. So I have recently moved gyms for training. So this is something that's quite difficult for me because I'm very much a person who's set in habit, very much set in what they know. So when we kind of thought about it, it was like, why would I do that? Why do I need to move gyms? This is a stupid thing. Happy where I am. And when we actually analyzed the situation and we wrote down the kind of pros and cons of it, it kind of came up as maybe there are some holes in my thinking of this. We've said time and time again on the podcast together, Jack, that when you kind of think, I don't really want to do that, it's probably a good opportunity for you to explore that some more and to be like, why don't I want to do that? Is there more to it? And to me, I think it was just a really safe place. It was somewhere I trained for years. It was somewhere that I knew really well, knew the people. But recently, like over lockdown and so on, we trained in a different gym, obviously once we could. And it was just quite a nice breath of fresh air. I found some almost new intensity to my training. I found that there were some new machines there I could have a play with. And it kind of struck me once we started discussing moving gyms, once we moved back home, that potentially there's many more bonuses or positives to it than there were negatives. And it has actually been really nice. It's almost been like a complete change in scenery, which has been, I wouldn't say necessarily needed, but having done that change of scenery, I'm like, wow, like this is really cool. It's really cool to have these new bits of equipment I can have a play on. And I think what it's done is just kind of sparked that real love and enjoyment for training for me again. Kind of going in and being like, oh, not used that before, and being like, right, what have I got today? Maybe I'll just trade that out and I'll have a go on this machine and see if it's something I like. Whereas before I would kind of go into the gym, I knew where everything was. I knew exactly where I needed to be. I know exactly what machine I was going to use or what weight or whatever. And I just think having that mental change up for me, not only because the machines are slightly different, which means that the mechanics are different, slightly different muscle engagement and so on, but also the weights are loads different as well. So it's like, what might be, I did hip abductions this morning, for example, and on the machine I use in the gym I used to be at, I was pretty much at the bottom of the stack. And so I started warming up like quite low as I normally would. And I was like, oh God, there's no stack moving on this one. And I think that's just quite nice. And, I'm not saying that everyone should go around moving gyms all the time, but certainly I think there's probably something in that we get safe in our psychology, we get safe in our habitat. And sometimes it probably does serve us well to just reach outside of that and go, actually, I'm going to challenge myself in something I'm grossly uncomfortable in doing, which for me is that change in environment, that change in habit, but equally should be very fruitful in doing so. So yeah, I'm quite excited for what's to come, really. Looking forward to it.
It's interesting with the weight selection there, because then you actually end up having to really make decisions based on RIR, genuinely, not just on what weight you used last week or what you know and what you think you can do on that machine. I think there's definitely something to be said for getting out a bit of a rut with training by moving gyms, going somewhere different, trying something different. I think I might have even said a few podcasts back that I moved gyms a little while ago. And something I've done quite actively at this place, or inactively, you can decide based on what I'm going to say, is I've not made any friends there, like intentionally, because at the last gym, you end up bumping into the same people every morning when you go at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's nice as like a social thing, but actually I'm not there to be social at, 6 o'clock in the morning when you want to just crack on and train and then get into your work day. And so, still keeping in contact with those people, seeing them outside of the gym or whatever, if you made some genuine friends. But then when you go to the new place, getting your head down, cracking on and just purely training. And I find my sessions are shorter now because I'd have like my watch going, I'd be timing my rest, and then someone comes over and starts chatting to you, and all of a sudden you're like 3 minutes in and you're like, right, mate, I've really got to go now. And then as soon as you finish your next set, they're back over to you talking again, and it's like a constant back and forth. So I think that's a thing that having a new gym can really help with as well, getting focused on your training instead of getting too comfortable in that environment.
Yeah, comfortable is the word I would use 100%. And it's like you say, I do tend to, the thing I have, like a lot of my old clients or current clients, in-person clients, were training at the same gym. So I'd always want to go over and help. I'd always be like, oh, like you can optimize this exercise by doing this and that. And obviously they'd be really grateful for that, and it would be fantastic. And I'd be like, oh, freaking hell, like I've just lost 5 minutes. And like in that case, like it wouldn't be the end of the world if I was doing like deadlifts or back squats or heavy leg presses or something where I needed some more rest time. But if I was in between a set of curls, I've pretty much just ruined that first set, because obviously the accumulation of all 3 or 4 sets is kind of downed by the fact that I've just basically got myself fresh for the second set. And so for me, I think
zone as well takes you out of that like level of focus that you have. I find now just like being in a new place where I'm not distracted, chucking on a playlist that I want to play and just cracking on with it and banging it out is a lot better for like intensity than when you're even if you are sticking to rest times and kind of cutting people off short, you're still like mentally distracted. And I feel like you're kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out when you're not fully focusing on that workout.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it can help if I'm doing something really heavy to have myself distracted in that sense. So if I've got like super heavy stiff leg deadlifts or bench press or squats, I find it's really helpful for me in terms of fatigue in a psychological sense to take myself out of that each time. Because like we spoke a bit about last week, if I know I'm going to go really heavy, I'm very, very good at getting myself in a really good place to lift. But I find that if I need to do, 3-4 sets, then sometimes for me, having someone just to calm me down, and not by being like, calm down, but just taking my mind away from it for a sec is really helpful. Else I find I get inside my own head a bit too much. And by the time I'm at that 4th set, I'm like ready to strangle someone, which is not a socially acceptable thing to do,
I get visions of you like in a fetal position at the corner of the deadlift platform, rocking back and forth to calm down.
You've seen the video, have you? But yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying 100%. It like yesterday we were home by the time that it usually takes us to finish our session. So to put that into perspective, we were home by 7:45 yesterday, and we usually wouldn't finish our session till 8. And we were both like sat here at home. Well, I started work earlier, Katie started work earlier, and we were both like, this is weird. But again, it's, we maybe were comfortable. Maybe we just dawdled around the gym a little bit, had a little chat, did a bit of this, did a bit of that. Both just in it for enjoying training at the moment. And so, there's not like a time pressure necessarily for us, especially with working from home. For Katie now, it's not like we have to rush home so she can get to work. It's quite nice in that respect. So today's topic, as requested from the YouTube fan, we have already released obviously our top 5 glute exercises, but it was requested that we now do hamstrings, quads, because people want to know that. So I thought, hey, let's dive into that. And I think the quads is going to be quite an interesting one. Not because I think the exercises that we'll probably discuss will be vastly different, but perhaps getting again to the end, like the 4th and 5th exercise, I think is probably where we might have some deviations, but that's what it's all about, right? So that's quite exciting. I'm really looking forward to that. So when you're ready, we'll go with 5 again. I'll let you lead and we'll go back and forward. So top 5 exercises for growth of the quads. Over to you.
I think people won't be surprised to hear that a lot of these are going to cross over with the glute exercises as well. So as with the glutes, I'd put a good squat in there as number 1. Like we said with the glutes though, when you have something like a squat that you're really focusing on, one of the great things about it is that you can modify it in a lot of different ways to make it kind of hit the muscles you want to most optimally and best. So for something like a squat, you may consider actually making it a front squat. I'm a huge fan of front squats, and I think they are a really good way to make it more knee dominant, more quad dominant, and bring a little bit less glute into there. Or doing something that is to like a box depth, so kind of parallel type height, you sink down to that box. And then you can also overload in terms of the weight quite substantially as well. Once you get used to that movement, once you are proficient with it, it may feel shaky and different at first, as things tend to, but if you really put in a good block of focus on something like those box squats, you can really start to overload those because you're not having to control the bottom part of the movement or go down below parallel as much. So yeah, I'd go with some sort of quad dominant squat variation. That can be your your main compound that you really focus on progressing week on week incrementally. And it's also something that across I think last time you gave the example of like only doing these exercises for a year, for example. If you are doing something like that over a prolonged period of time, then you can bring in all these different variations in different blocks, continue to get progress and kind of unique work for those muscles, even though you're still technically using the same movement pattern.
Yeah, I agree. I think the year point is really good there. There are many exercises which I would trade in and out because at times they can become quite joint sensitive. So, for example, if you had someone who just hammered 3x10 bench press all year round, the chances are their elbows are going to start hurting. But the good thing about things like the bench, the squat, they're really easy to undulate in terms of the volume that you use for them. So you could say, go, right, this block, we're going to do a heavy set of front squats. That's going to be our prime. We'll do higher sets of maybe leg press after that, for example. But the main focus, the main compound here is going to be that. The next block, you might go, right, we're going to bring back in the back squat. We'll use the front squat as maybe a secondary mover. So maybe a higher volume one. As we know, I'm a big fan of a 12 to 15 rep front squat, which is just lovely. But like you say, it's really easy to trade those in and out with different exercises of the same pattern. I think for me, it's really good to emphasize here because a lot of people ask this, and I think it comes down to people scaremongering about knees. And of a lot of people, I think I would be susceptible to being scaremongered from knees. But squat depth is very important for squats in terms of activating the quads because we're looking at knee flexion. So the more knee flexion you can get, the better. However, there obviously are nuances to this, and I'm sure, Jack, your brain cells are ticking over now because, as you said, you can overload the certain pattern where you're going to like a knee dominant box squat, for example. So a lot of the box squats that I would program are more glute dominant, where we look to shift the hips back. But I know that you're a big fan of box squats where you actually squat in a very normal pattern, but use that as like a height indicator, I guess you could say. And then overload that pattern so that we're getting a higher amount of force in that movement. And so what I would say is, if anyone's wondering at the moment, should I squat to depth? Should I not squat to depth? Where shall I go? If you have it, use it. So if you're someone who can squat all the way to the ground with good proprioception, the knees are functioning well, your hips are fine, then use it. Because if you don't use it, you're likely going to lose it. But don't expect to just like box squat, as Jack has just said, and then go, okay, Xander said, let's take this to depth. That weight is not going to transfer. So I think generally speaking, it's like 5 to 8% of the joint you can transfer weight. So if you got more mobile, that strength would transfer between 5 and 8% more. But if you're talking about 20%, there's just no way. And what you're likely going to do is increase your chance of injury. So I would lower the weight a great deal, warm up from the very start using that range of motion, and then build up to using a weight that's manageable for that range that you have.
And importantly, to underscore on the other side of the spectrum as well, not everyone has to squat arse to grass. Like you don't, some people say this is like a real dogmatic, everyone should be able to do this or everyone has to do this. It's just not the case. If you don't have the mobility to get all the way down far below parallel without your lower back rounding and without other things coming into effect, then you shouldn't be doing it. And you certainly shouldn't be loading that pattern heavier and heavier. If you're able to get to parallel, maybe just a touch below parallel, you're probably fine. I'm not advocating quarter squats or anything, but if you're getting down to parallel or just beyond, you're good. If you want to take it further, if you're someone who wants to set that as a goal, then you have to set specific mobility targets for that. You can't just say, well, I'm going to keep forcing my body down there with more and more weight. That's just going to result in an injury.
Yeah, I agree with that fully. And, as I said, it's about if you have it, use it. And if you don't, but the key for me there, Jack, and what you just said was, you see some people go, hey, look, I can squat to depth. But the only reason their hips have got to that height is because they've rounded at the back really badly. You don't want to have this concave back shape. You want to be convex. You want to be ski slope shaped, not mountain shaped. So if you're in the bottom of your squat, you should have maintained that lovely shape in the lower back. And if you can't, and you have what's called a hip wink, where you kind of twist in the hips, then as Jack said, you're just most likely to injure yourself, and then you can't do any squats at all. But if you're listening to this and going, oh, I can't squat to depth, then potentially it might be that you, if we're talking about parallel, that you work on certain things, ankle mobility, hip mobility, knee mobility. But if you have blocks in place, or mechanically it's just very difficult for you, then don't bang your head against the wall trying, and certainly don't load up enough weight so that you sink into that position, because it's not going to be progressive, and it's certainly not going to be helpful for you going forward.
I think this is a good opportunity to plug your Form Check Fridays.
Oh, Form Check Fridays. Yes, good idea. Good idea. So if you do have any videos, by the way, send them in. We had a few last week, which are great, and they're going to be coming out this week. So obviously by the time this podcast comes out, I think generally speaking, it's going to be running for a few weeks now, which is great. But it's a really good opportunity to just run your form past us. Lauren's been doing some fantastic work for us across the pond in some of her stories, getting all our funky luminant lines out and all of that good stuff. So, you've got some really good brains to look over stuff. And equally, if you don't have form videos, ask questions if you've got them. We had some fantastic questions as well. So do send them in. Don't forget to hashtag Form Check Fridays, and obviously tag us so we can see it, or send it to us so we're able to download it so we can repost it. A couple of people sent some last week where they were not downloadable, so you watch them and they disappear. Make sure you send them so we can download them. Number two on the list. What's up next? You're smirking.
I'm gonna put the cat amongst the pigeons here.
I knew it.
Secondly, I'm gonna put leg extensions there. I'm gonna let that one marinate for a little bit, because I know you're also using leg extensions pretty heavily, obviously in your rehab. But for me, it comes down to the fact that if you've got some sort of squat variation, the next thing that I would then recommend someone to go and do, because at this point we've only got 2 exercises, wouldn't then be basically go and replicate that movement on a leg press. Because actually what we see, and this is backed by scientific data, this isn't me being anecdotal or just really favoring a leg extension, we actually see that there's a good chunk of the quads that just don't get activated, certainly not optimally, in something like a squat movement pattern. So I believe it's the rectus femoris, which takes up around about 25 to 30% of the quad musculature. So you're looking at a good amount of the quad there that just doesn't really engage with the squat movement, whereas it does with the leg extension movement, and it's absolutely popping in terms of activation when you're doing the leg extensions. So if you've got 2 to choose from at this stage, I'd want to bash them really hard with that compound and get really good work for kind of 70-75% of the quads, and of course all the benefits that come with working those types of compound exercises. And then I'd say, right, if we're really trying to optimize quads, we want to get in some leg extension work, because otherwise that rectus femoris, a good 25-30% of the quads, just isn't going to be getting activated in the way that we want it to.
Interesting. So I think I would agree on a session to session basis. So I often pair up squats with leg extensions, purely because squats are very
not
fatiguing.
as a superset. Let me just clarify.
No. Could you imagine that?
Mate, some people do it.
I tell you what, I have done some similar things in like metabolite based training, where you might go leg press front squat. It is horrendous, but I tell you what, if you want to really fuck your legs up and pump them full of blood, it's wicked. Some of the people who would have had my at home plans throughout the kind of lockdown, I think would have got a taste for this, and quite a few of them I think realized that they were pretty fucking sadistic people deep down inside. They're like, this is horrible, but I love it. I'm like, you are not okay. But yeah, I think from my perspective, so I'd always go, usually within a session, depending on who I've got, I would usually pair them. So I would use them in the same session, not back to back, and certainly not as a superset. Because I find that if you look at stimulus to fatigue, we have quite a lot of fatigue with a back squat, but we have a good deal of stimulus. Then you look at a leg extension, loads of stimulus. And I wouldn't say they're that fatiguing, to be honest. I don't see anyone kind of doing a few sets of leg extensions and then being like, shit, I'm going to vomit. And then generally the aftermath of that, I find, sometimes you might get a bit of soreness and some residual pump, but generally speaking, they're not, systematically fatiguing. So that is a really good mixture for me. I certainly wouldn't be doing something like a back squat into a leg press, as you say, both very heavy movements, both very, I'm not going to say partial, but not super engaging of the quads on a stimulus level. Because a lot of people say, oh, I do squats, but I don't feel them in my legs. And I'm thinking, well, I'm concentrating on not dying. So that's why I don't feel them in my legs. Whereas when I do leg extensions, I'm fully focusing on pulling my shin up as hard as I can, squeezing really hard at the top. You just can't really do that when you're squatting. If you're squatting a good weight, then if you're thinking about, squeeze quads, it's just kind of, you're not going to be lifting very much because it's not really the aim of that movement. So I'm going to agree with you on that. I think leg extensions are a really effective motion. I think they're a fantastic exercise. And as you rightly said, there's something that's played a huge part in my rehab over the years, and especially now, mainly because I really struggled to get full extension. So I was like 10 degrees off full extension for a while. I think it was like 7 or 8, which doesn't sound like much, but when you're walking like Captain Hook, because one of your legs doesn't straighten, it certainly does. It certainly does do its bit. So yeah, having and the idea of the leg extension is that you coach the muscle in pulling the leg straight. And once you get that full extension, it's just about keeping the muscle working that range of motion and keeping it straight. So yeah, it's been very beneficial for me.
I think with leg extensions, these are one where we would put a real emphasis on execution and actually pushing that muscle to the RIR, because I think sometimes people get caught up in thinking leg extensions are just a little bit of like an easy accessory. You go on, you kind of crack out 10 of what I'd argue are kind of partial reps, not really getting a decent stretch at the bottom, and certainly not getting to full contraction at the top.
Yeah.
And just doing 10 for the sake of 10 with a similar weight to what they normally do, and then moving on to the next thing. So maybe it'd be good to take people through some coaching points for the leg extension, because there's more things to think about than I think a lot of people realize.
Definitely. I actually had a really interesting moment last week, I think, in my leg extensions. I started putting in sets of 20 to 25, mainly because I've started to implement more compound based movements now. So I've started to squat a lot heavier, leg press heavier, etc. And I thought, well, it's probably a good idea if I calm these down a little bit, because they were much heavier. They were like the 8 to 10 range. And I thought, it'd be really cool just to test my pain threshold with it. And I'm not joking. Like, I was really disappointed in myself. Like, I got to like 25 reps and my quads were on fire. My legs, if you took a video and you played that back to me, I'd have been really upset with myself, because my legs were firing wonderfully. I just couldn't withstand the pain. I was just like, this is hurting a lot. And I just couldn't squeeze it out. I got off and I was like, oh man, I was so disappointed in myself, because I just thought I'm absolutely safe here. My knee feels brilliant. My quads are firing fantastically. And I just completely just bailed. I just couldn't handle it. And I think the key here isn't in that I'm sat here saying, I completely just bottled it. It's more the case that I actually changed something which led to me bottling it. And that was, I've put a humongous amount of effort into form lately. Whereas before, when my knees were semi-good, I just used to just leg extension heavy and just pump them out. I might get a good pump at the end. But I always just think, I can get some more reps here if I do this. And actually that trade-off to me is never worth it anymore, because I think if I have to do something else to get the weight up and I've not programmed myself like a rest pause or a drop set, I shouldn't do that, because that's not good form anymore. That's just me cheating to get some more reps. And as you lead into kind of coaching points, one of the things I think is important to note is that the quads pull the shin up. So I don't know if people necessarily focus on this kind of stuff, but basically the quads work to pull the shin into straight parallel to the ground if you're in a leg extension position. And why is it important to know that? Well, it's really important from my opinion. I'm sure you'll agree. And if you don't, then do say that if you understand how the mechanics of muscles work, you understand why you're doing something and what you're actually doing. So for example, if you're doing a leg extension and you think your quads just work and they contract on the spot and your knee straightens, it's not quite how it happens. They contract by basically shortening, and by shortening, they pull the shin up, because that's the lever that they're on. So in that last bit, what you want to be doing is really squeezing almost the quads down, the legs down, the thighs down into the chair, so that your shins can come up a bit higher. And that's when you'll get that kind of medial quad burn terribly. And this is what I was doing at the end of each rep. I was just squeezing it. And when I got to like 15 reps, it was just painful. Like, not painful like tendon painful, just blood was there, metabolites were there, and it just hurt. And I kept going with this same form. And the reason I was disappointed was because I think I probably could have got to 30 before my legs started to slow down. But I just bottled it, to be honest. What would be your main coaching point, just as a singular thing for a leg extension?
Can I just run through a few? Can I go through what I do for setup and the exercise?
Yeah, take it away.
I think there's multiple. So first thing is really getting your ass fixed into that seat and actively using either the side of the seat, or if it's got dedicated handles, whichever feel more comfortable for you to hold, to actively pull yourself into it. And that also comes alongside having the back pad supporting you at the right level. So generally you just want the kind of top of the bottom of the hamstrings, so just above the knee at the back of the leg. That's the only part that's touching on the bottom part of the seat. You do want to be pulled back nice and tight to that. You don't want kind of mid or top of your hamstring, so most of your leg is essentially hanging off from there. Because like Xander said, you want to be driving that hamstring, the back of the leg, into the seat. This is really important because what I see a lot of people do is, as they get heavier, they start to basically bring the hips and the torso movement into it. So they're kind of bobbing up as the weight comes back down and then throwing themselves back down into the seat as they kick up. And that just really compromises range of motion. So when you're working something like a leg extension and a hinge joint like the knee, where purely, like Xander said, you're trying to bring those shins upwards, that's the only movement you're trying to do. If you're bringing any other body parts into it, then you're not actually working that quad optimally. You're shifting that weight with other joints and other muscles. So that's the first thing. Then when it comes to foot positioning, I like to put the pad on my kind of mid to upper ankle, of course, on the front of your foot, the equivalent there. So you can then basically pull your toes back and kind of wrap your foot around that bar that you're pushing up on at the time. Start from a point that is as far stretched under as you can comfortably do. You know, if you've got knee problems or whatever, then that's for you to decide. But you want to be getting as much of full range of motion as you can at the bottom there. As you start to drive up, you want to think about pushing those shins upwards, so towards the ceiling, really pushing your ass and your hamstrings down into that seat. And when you get to the top, you do want to make sure you really get to full extension there, and you're actively squeezing the quads at the top. That's a really important one. You're not just letting the pad kind of come towards the top and then fall back down. You're actually squeezing the quads at the top. And then when it comes to lowering, make sure that you're lowering under control. Because again, a huge thing that I see is people dropping that weight back down, kind of catching it on the way back up as they start that concentric and that kick out, and never really getting through that full range of motion.
Perfect. I think that's fantastic. Yeah, I totally agree with those points. There's nothing else I'd change. I would just underline and especially and reiterate how important it is to pull yourself into the chair. You know, a lot of people you see kind of bobbing up and down as they leg press, as they're doing their leg extensions. And all that's doing is effectively losing power that you could be generating through your quads. You know, the idea of pulling yourself into the chair is that you are isolated, you are still, and it should enable you to generate more torque because effectively everything else is still. The demonstration I would use, it would be like trying to squat on a mattress. You just can't generate that much power because the mattress is going to withstand some of that force. And if you're bobbing up and down trying to do your leg extensions, not only, as Jack says, are you going to lose out on range of motion, we're just going to lose out on power as well, because you've got nothing to ground you for you to, initiate that force and be consistent with.
And if you're doing that in order to shift more weight, I can tell you categorically that no one gives a shit how much you're leg extensioning. No one cares. It's fine. Do what is right to get your quads working optimally through that range of motion. And beyond that, nothing else matters.
Yeah. I think my last point on this one would be to bring us back what we spoke about a few weeks ago, in that if you can't feel your quads working doing a leg extension, the chances are, if you're intermediate and not brand new, don't get me wrong, if you've just stepped in the gym for the first time, I'm not expecting you're going to have pinpoint muscle-mind connection. But if you're intermediate, or at least someone who's trained for a while, and you can't feel your quads working and your knees are hurting or the backs of your hamstrings are hurting, chances are you're probably not doing something right. So the best thing to do would be take on board all of those tips Jack just said, throw your ego in the bin and go, right, I'll start with 5 kilos and see what happens. And try and make that weight feel as heavy as you can. Really dial in the quads, pretend it weighs like a ton, and go really slowly through that range. And you'll start to feel, it's quite interesting, if you've ever had like a surgery in any area, I start to feel these like prickly sensations. So I get, if anyone's ever had a scar, you kind of understand how that feels, but it's almost like the nerves are starting to fire in that area again. And for me, that happened quite early on, and it's quite exciting, because I'm like, oh, they're coming back. And if you're kind of new, or you're someone who hasn't previously nailed leg extensions, like you might be listening to this thinking, leg extensions just don't work for me. Chances are you've just got your setup right. You might be lifting a bit too heavy, or you've just not given yourself enough chance with that lighter stuff to really let them do the jobs properly on the muscles that are supposed to be working. I think that's fair to say. Number 3, sir.
Number 3 also has carryover from our glute episode, and that would be some form of split leg variation or lunge variation. So that could be Bulgarian split squats, or it could be barbell walking lunges, or something along those lines. I went through in the glute episode how you can make things kind of more glute or more quad dominant. So just to quickly touch base on that in this one, to make things more quad dominant, for something like a lunge, you're narrowing your stride, so you're not stepping out as far. You're descending down whilst actually trying to push that knee over the toe and driving a lot of weight through the kind of mid to forefoot. And as you push back up, again, you're driving that mid to forefoot into the floor, pushing up through the quad, rather than kind of sinking back into the heel. Something like that is going to be a compound. I think you used the term in the glute one. I can't remember exactly what you said, but it was like a smaller compound, almost like a secondary
compound. Yeah.
Right. So something like a secondary compound where it's not your squat, but you are still working multiple muscles in the lower body whilst doing that. It is something that if you want, you can really overload, and you can really go nice and heavy with. If you can get a good heavy barbell on your back, or you can hold a really heavy dumbbell whilst doing like Bulgarian split squats with the rear foot elevated. But you can also take it to another end of the extreme and be doing, 30 rep lunge sets if you're sadistic, and if you want to switch up those rep ranges. I just think they're a great alternative.
Yeah, I agree fully. I think one of the things that we've definitely discussed before, maybe not on the podcast, but in person, is repeatability for lunges. So if you're someone who has terrible balance, don't be afraid, if you're doing Bulgarian split squats, to strap a heavy dumbbell to one hand and hold on to a machine or a bench or whatever it is, in the other hand. That's absolutely fine, because we're not here to join the circus. We're here to stimulate muscle tissue. And if you spend your whole time hopping around like floor is lava, which I see all the time, you're just not going to be doing that, because you'll be so worried about whether you're going to fall over or not that you can't actually do the exercise. So if you're doing things like split squats, Bulgarian split squats, then balance is important. If you've got good balance, have at it, go for it, But if you don't be afraid to just hold on to something, strap on a dumbbell to one hand, and as I said, hold on to something stable in the other.
And this comes back to, what are your goals? Like, I always used to have these conversations with clients where, if I'd say, for example, do a dumbbell Bulgarian split squat, I want you to use a wrist strap to hold that one really heavy dumbbell, and then hold on to something else with your other hand, so you can really just focus in on smashing that muscle. and you'd get things back like, oh, but I want to get better at, doing that. So I'm going to actually use 2 dumbbells, or they'd send me a form video and they're not doing it. They're using 2 dumbbells. Or they might say something like, oh, but I want my grip strength to get better or something. So maybe I shouldn't be using a strap, or some powerlifting bloke in the gym told me my grip should be better. I shouldn't have to use straps or whatever. And you break it down and you say, but what's your actual goal? Do you want bigger quads and bigger glutes? Or do you want greater forearm strength? For 99.8% of women out there, they probably don't want bigger, stronger forearms.
Yeah.
So,
I was going to say, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those guys, to be putting a limiter on what their quads and their glutes can do, purely because they are being held back by what their forearm can handle or what their balance can handle, is only going to be holding them back in terms of the actual progress they want to make towards their goal. So however you have to kind of make exercises work for you to hit those muscles optimally, and like Xander said, the goal of actually building that muscle, not doing something like improving your balance, the better. The more you can modify that stuff, go for it.
Yeah, I've said this to people before in this analogy. Usain Bolt is built to sprint. That's his goal, right? His goal is to be the fastest sprinter in the world. And you wouldn't catch him wearing trainers instead of spikes purely on the basis that he wants to be smoother along the court, or he wants to have more suspension in his shoes. I want to get better at running in trainers. Like, you just don't hear that. He wants to get faster at running, so he will do anything he can to be better at running. He'll wear spikes, he'll wear lycra, he'll do all of the optimal things, but you won't see him go, actually, I'd like to get better at running in trainers, because it's completely irrelevant.
I'm going to sprint along a beam as quick as I can because I want to work on my balance.
With sharks at the side. And that has, you're totally right. It has to come down to what that is you actually want. And, I say to people, if you want to improve your balance, get a stronger set of legs. A lot of the time people don't have good balance because they have poor proprioception. Poor proprioception typically linked to poor muscular control. Poor muscular control, poor use of the muscle. If you can improve your use of the muscle through things like Bulgarian split squats with assistance, it's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's never a bad thing to use assistance. I have clients who started off with using an assistance, and now they're like, hey, do you know what? I think I could use 2 kettlebells, because actually the weight I've got to use in one side is really starting to work my core more than it's working my legs. And for them, it's like, okay, if you can balance with 2 kettlebells effectively, let's do that. But they didn't start like that. And you can bet your bottom dollar they wouldn't be where they are now if I'd have gone, you're not allowed to use support, you have to do 2 kettlebells. They'd have been like, well, balance is a bit of an issue here. If you want to work on balance, then, as I said, getting stronger is one thing, but you can also do that in your free time. Stand on one leg on a tennis ball in your sitting room with your eyes closed and touch your nose. Maybe don't do that. But, there are certain things you can do to improve balance that are outside the realm of what would interfere with your main goal, I'd say.
Yeah.
4. So let's just round up. We've got back squat, leg extension, lunge variation. Out of curiosity, if I had to press you for a favorite lunge, what would it be?
A good old walking barbell lunge, executed every single rep as if it's your only one. So not falling forward into one rep, shakily pushing yourself back up when your knee slams onto the floor and rinse and repeating. Properly executing every single one with a good heavy barbell on your back is serious work.
Funny story. When I think it was after my 4th, I started doing my rehab, and I got into lunges, and I had such terrible proprioception that I started doing walking lunges. As part of my rehab, it's a perfectly normal thing to be doing. But I completely had no control over my knee. So when I dipped down, I cracked my knee so hard on the gym floor. It put me back like another week.
Oh, man.
So if you're one of these people who aren't sure about their levels of awareness of joints, then instead of strapping one of those little blue yoga mats to your knees, which I contemplated doing, what you can do is just go a bit higher, or do them in a mirror so you can see where your knee is. But yeah, I think I do really like a walking lunge. I'm more of a fan of a dumbbell one, just on the fact that it's easier to escape if you want to go to like RIR2 than it is a barbell one. But that's my preference. It's easier to drop dumbbells than it is to get a barbell off your back, I find. So from my personal preference, I find it's more comfortable, more safe, I think, for me. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I don't know. Sometimes it's good to be threatened by something. But yeah, I do like it. Where are we now? 4? Number 4? Yeah, 4. Oh. Hello? Hello?
Yo.
Ah, you're back. I lost you then.
Yeah, it cut you when you said you were saying about taking a barbell off your back is where you got up to, and then you said something like, "Oh, but sometimes maybe it's better to be threatened by that or something."
Yeah, I pretty much stopped there, to be honest. That was the end of my comment. And then I just said, we're on to number 4 now, and then you froze.
Okay, so shall I
We?
crack on from there?
Yeah, I'll just say, what about number 4, and then we'll crack on, shall we? Because I can cut it from my last bit.
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay, so on to number 4 now. What's up next?
4 would come in with a good leg press, I would say. Leg press is a nice thing to add in. I think often I'd put it in clients' plans if they may have like a goal to build their entire lower body. Maybe they have 3 different lower body sessions across the week. And if one of those in particular is more like hamstring and glute dominant, but you want to at least get one quad exercise in there, then I might chuck in something like a leg press, because it's quicker to get going on and easier to set up than going for like a full squat in a rack and everything, and easier to warm up with. But then you're still getting a good amount of stimulus to the legs, but again with less fatigue than something like a squat as well. So then you can roll into those subsequent quad-based sessions in a couple of days' time easier than if you were to, smash out a 5x5 or something on that day that's supposed to be more ham and glute dominant. So yeah, I'd go leg press. Generally, variations are keeping your feet in line with kind of where your hips are, about hip width apart, not going super close. I see some people taking the close stance leg press way too far and literally having their feet touching. All that's actually going to do is just disadvantage you from really getting the weight moving, like moving as much as possible. So a bit like we said with the glute stuff, if you're putting your feet like really, really far apart on a Smith machine squat or something, you're actually just essentially missing out on a lot more weight that you could be shifting. So just feet about hip width apart, relatively low on the plate rather than going right up towards the top, because that's going to make it more knee dominant, more quad dominant. Like with the lunges, really driving up through the midfoot to forefoot. I don't like to go all the way to lockout on leg press because of the risk of messing with your knees. If you were to just go a little bit too far and hyperextend your knees, especially if you're someone who's particularly flexible, and then you've got that sled of all that weight kind of weighing down on them, you can end up with a really nasty accident, as you can picture. So unlike the leg extensions, I wouldn't go all the way to absolute full extension with it, but I'd get as close as you could be, still with a little bit of a soft kind of bend in the knee at the top, but still squeezing those quads at the top and all the way up, lowering down with a nice bit of control. And like with the squats, going as low as you possibly can without your back rounding. This is something where you have to consider that as well. And it can be more insidious, I would say, on the leg press, because it's more obvious when you're squatting. You can see if you get that butt wink at the bottom and your hips kind of shoot under. When you're hidden in the seat of a leg press, it's much harder to actually tease out. So like with the leg extension, make sure that you are pulling yourself into that seat. You've got your glutes, your upper glutes and your lower back all flush with that seat, and you are keeping them there that whole time. If you're coming down so far that you have to round the lower back and everything starts to come up off of the seat, then you're just loading your spine in a very compromised position, and you're going to have to work on range of motion before you can start to load that pattern and make that range of motion greater.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I found to help with that is if you put your feet a bit wider. So if you're someone who has really tight lower back or tight hamstrings, then it's very susceptible for you to have that drop, that kind of as you come down, the lower back starts to round. If you go a bit wider and open up your hips a bit more, then it can help. However, what you are potentially trading off then is more direct quad work. You might get the adductors come in a bit more then, which isn't the end of the world. I don't think that's a bad thing to have at all. But just be aware that if you're going from, as Jack said, like a neutral narrow stance, so not like ridiculously feet together, but you're going to go a little bit wider and drive the knees out further, it's a little bit less direct, but it might be more comfortable, and therefore it may allow you to do the exercise properly. That's not to say that that's right or wrong, but in your circumstance, that may be right, and therefore a good way to go about that. When it comes to the actual exercise itself, I totally agree with the knee flexing / straightening. There are people who say you should straighten the knees, you get more out of them, but in this instance, if we look at kind of torque angle and where the pressure is coming on, I personally don't see how you benefit from locking the legs, because in this instance, if you lock the legs, the pressure is, if in a leg extension, the pressure is going with gravity, right? It's going straight down. And therefore, when you lock the legs, the quads are straightening the shin. Therefore, the pressure is going down. So it's acting directly against the job of the quad. But in a leg extension, I personally have never seen how that is. So, Jack, unless you're going to explain to me now how that is, I'm wrong in this. I don't see how pressure coming from the direct angle, which when your knees lock out, the bones surely just take the pressure there. I can't personally see how we would benefit from going into hyperextension or full extension. Whereas if you have that...
You said leg extension there. Do you mean leg press?
Sorry, leg press. Yeah. In a leg press, yeah. Apologies there, guys. I don't see how we would get the benefit there versus holding a slight bend. And I don't know about you, but like if I get to, if I'm doing 10 to 12 reps, when I get to rep like 8 and I'm getting to what I would call full extension on a leg press, and that's not full extension like it would be on a leg extension, I'm saying where I'm comfortable to go, my legs are shaking. Like, there's no let off. There really is no let off there.
I think a good way to think about it is like places where we might put tactical pauses in certain reps. So something like a leg press, for example, we'd never put a pause right at the top because there's very little strain there. If someone asks you to load up a leg press and just sit there with it at the top, you could sit there for hours.
Yeah, it's like standing up.
Whereas if you said, right, pause at the bottom, where you've got loads of tension on your lower body and you're holding that movement, you're going to be shaking within seconds. And that tells you where the tension is. You can think about that for a lot of exercises as well. So should you be spending time chilling at the top of a leg press with your legs fully extended? It's probably not going to bring you any added benefit, and it does certainly add additional risk. And even though it's very unlikely for it to happen, i.e., snapping your knee because you've gone to hyperextension and the plate comes back and the weight injures you, it's very unlikely. But if the outcome happens, it's pretty devastating. Like there's a low risk in terms of how likely it is to happen, but the potential outcome is very, very bad.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not something that I would risk for something that also probably doesn't even have any benefit.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. I think the key is in what you said, that the risk to reward might not be, or like the risk in itself might not be massive, but you can YouTube videos. There's tons of them on there if you really want to scare yourself, but I probably wouldn't.
Wince even saying that. Yeah.
Knees are just not fun joints to fix, guys. I promise you.
It's like with, I used to speak about a lot with clients with pregnancy training. Like, even if these events are very, very, very unlikely to happen, the outcome could be catastrophic. So if someone's in their, second, third trimester of pregnancy and they still want to be working on pull-ups or something, I'll say, look, should we not have you dangling on a bar, a few feet off the floor, doing an exercise that you're not yet super proficient at or whatever, because yes, the chance that you fall or your hand slips or a grip slips off or something is tiny. It's a very small risk. But if that one thing does happen, the outcome of you falling from a few feet when you're pregnant can be absolutely catastrophic. So why don't we just not have that risk for a few months?
Yeah.
You know, I always try and frame it in that way of, no matter how unlikely, if you think the outcome's going to be bad enough, just don't go there.
Yeah, I agree fully with that. I think the cool thing about a leg press, to bring this back kind of full circle, I just thought of this when you said the likelihood of it going badly. The thing I actually really like about a leg press is that I find you can use quite a lot of different rep ranges and a lot of different tempos with it. So I know that we are both a big fan of a 4-second eccentric, and I like to call them the cheese grater because I can feel my quads shattering on the way down. But I'm also a big fan of like a set of 10 to 15 on a leg press. I don't see that that's something that's particularly bad. I wouldn't probably do 10 to 15 on a back squat personally. 10, yes. 15, probably not. Front squat, yes, because it's fun. But I find that a leg press for 15 reps with a good tempo, if you're feeling the movement all the way through, not particularly fatiguing, but it can be. And if you're using a tempo, then I find that usually means the weight is going to be a lot less in terms of what you're actually capable of using. Therefore, we can reduce fatigue in that manner. But also the time under tension is just incredible. And generally the amount of build up in pump I get from that is fantastic. So it's something I quite enjoy personally. And I find it helps to add a bit of variation. I don't think there's too many bad things to come from that, really, unless you can.
No, I agree. Yeah, I don't want to paint the picture that I think it's a dangerous exercise or that it's risky. As I said, the chance of anything going wrong is extremely slim, and I think it's a great exercise. That's just purely on the note of locking out.
I think it's important to note that, though. Don't get me wrong. I think, you know, I wouldn't have discussed leg press if I was sat here by myself and not said, you know, there are people who will say do this, but you have to consider these factors. It's like with anything, you know, you get people who claim to be nutrition experts telling you to do X, Y, Z. In fact, just to make this point, I was on Instagram last night. Someone with about 285,000 followers, blue tick the lot, a fish, who was a nutritionist of some description. She was saying, I don't count calories because the calories aren't all created equal. And because actually, if we look at this candy here, it's all made of sugar and we know that sugar's not good for you. And I thought, what? And if somebody took that at face value, say you were brand new to the industry, you saw this person by Instagram standards, they are official, you know, a lot of people would back them. The video was very well set up. I'm not going to say it was good. It was very well set up. And I just thought, you know, that kind of information, if you transfer that into a training sense, whilst that's not dangerous, although psychologically it's damaging in my opinion. But if you take that into a training sense and this person made a video, you should extend your legs to full extension every time with no context, then you could end up snapping 1 in 100 people. And whilst you could say, well, I'll take my chances on 1 in 100, if I gave you 100 Skittles and told you one of them was going to kill you, you probably wouldn't eat any of the Skittles. I think that's where you've got to be a bit more kind of diligent and mindful in the advice you take. And I think that's why it's important for us to highlight these things. We're not sat here trying to be like, don't ever leg press, you'll snap you'll snap your shit up. It's more a case of going, you won't do that if you stick to these parameters. And if you decide to go outside those parameters, please do understand that there may potentially be some backlash. I think it's responsible to do that. Right. Last one. Something a bit rogue, maybe. I've got one.
You got one? Maybe shoot for it. Let me see if I agree.
I'm going to wait for you.
I don't know if I've got a fifth that comes to mind. I'm trying to think of one that would be in a different category almost to the ones that we've spoken about so far.
I'll shoot for mine then if you like.
Go for it.
So I really do like, and this actually mostly came out of people training from home. And it's something that I probably wouldn't use for people who are super advanced, but although it can mess you up pretty nicely, so maybe I would. But that's a heel raised goblet squat. Now, I find that the elevator pattern where you can get loads of knee flexion, you can get nice upright torso, It's a little less daunting than something like a front squat. It's a lot less fatiguing than something like a front squat. But if you put like a 3-second eccentric on that, a 1-second pause in the bottom, and instead of like a really explosive stand up, like a controlled stand up, I find they absolutely wreck. And you don't have to load like 20 kilo dumbbells on either shoulder. You can just hold one 20 or 30 kilo dumbbell, for example, if you're someone who is more advanced listening to this, and just take your time with it. And I find that can be a really gnarly exercise to really hit the quads. Would I use it like in every block? No, I wouldn't. But I'm just trying to go a little bit outside the box, just something that some of you may not have tried yet. So if you have in your gym like one of those 25 kilo bumper plates, so they're like, I don't know, 2.5, 3 inches thick, that can be a really nice platform to pop your heels on. And then the idea is that you turn your toes out just ever so slightly so your hips have enough room to sit down. The idea that you have that plate is that you're able to get a lot more flexion out of the ankle. If you're someone who's super mobile, this will be even more fun because your shins get basically parallel to the ground. And you end up basically getting loads of flexion at the knee, loads of pressure there through the quads, lots of stretch, which is really nice. And generally, it's quite a safe exercise to do like 20, 30 reps too. And if you're trying to get a bit of a pump, do 2 sets of those with a 30-second break in between, and you'll soon know about it. But just as something a little bit different.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking that a goblet squat would be too closely tied to the first, but it's not, because one's using a barbell, one's using a dumbbell. So yeah, I think I'd agree on that one and say that you would probably, depending on your level, beginner, intermediate, advanced, depends on where you might slot them in your workout. And also depends how much of a focus you've got on quads versus the rest of your lower body. If you're like really wanting to grow your quads, you're not that bothered about glutes, then you may want to bring in something like that, because then you're going to be having less of the kind of glute dominant movement. You're not sitting back in it as much. You're not loading in that same sort of way that's going to emphasize the glutes. Whereas if you're someone who wants to build quads and glutes equally, then you're probably better off getting more bang for your buck from smashing out more back squats and front squats with different rep ranges across the week. I've used them before. This is going to sound like a flex. It's not. But just purely from how long I've been training and how long I've been training my lower body, I always found the limiter was how heavy dumbbells go up to in the gym and being able to kind of comfortably hold it in that position. So the only time that I've ever really used them is like last thing in a workout, and even like post leg extension. So my quads are like really, really, really fried. So then I can actually get to some level of close to failure with using a super heavy dumbbell and elevating those heels.
Yeah, I think that's a nice touch actually. If you're someone who is thinking, I could do with a bit more leg volume, but maybe don't want to do any more squats or something like that, it could be a really good idea. As Jack just said, hop on the leg extension. And then after you've done that, maybe two sets or 3 sets with a dumbbell, and you won't be able to do as much weight as you would if you were fresh. And don't get me wrong, this isn't an exercise I tend to put at the front end of a session. It was just that I was trying to find some more ways to make things interesting while people were training from home. And I tend to try these things out myself anyway. And I was just like, this is marvelous. And then I thought, well, if you could translate that into a plan, how would it look? And I thought, well, I wouldn't trade it out for a back squat, and I certainly wouldn't trade it out for a front squat in more advanced people. But if you're someone who hates a front squat position and maybe is new to training, then maybe that's your trade-off. Maybe it's a goblet squat for you that works well there. And you don't have to stick to that 10, 12, or 15 rep range. You can go up and up and up. Just make sure you load in the dumbbell well so your elbows don't take the flack for it. And yeah, I think that's a nice way to finish off a session if you're someone just looking for a bit more of a pump, really.
Mm-hmm. And if you're someone who is a bit fresher to it all, then it can be a really good way to start to progress the movement pattern for going into full front squats. So maybe you start off with something that's, like a literal machine kind of squat based motion, something like a leg press, maybe go into something like a hack squat. As you then start to progress on and get onto free weights, you can use things like a dumbbell goblet squat without the heels elevated, get used to that pattern, then start to move your way into barbell squats, over to barbell front squats, and just always be progressing things without thinking, I should be doing XYZ. You'll be better off doing a hack squat with perfect form than you will be really butchering a back squat, because you're just
Yeah.
not there yet in terms of your progression of movements. So make sure that you're only doing the movements that you are proficient at the time and able to load those muscles well with.
That last point is the key. What can you load your muscles well with, right? And I think there'll be probably some people that are like, hey, I do Smith machine squats, or hey, I do hack squats, or hey, I do all my work on a leg press. That's absolutely fine. You know, it's not that the 5 exercises we've just mentioned are the best for everyone. They're just the ones that we would choose to do. If we had to do them, as Jack said, for a year, for example, you know, if we had to do 5 things, what would they be? And if you're using a Smith machine, for example, there's a ton of cool exercises you can do with the Smith machine, and some really advanced work you can do there as well. It's not just, you know, some people would look down on a Smith machine for squats and think, oh, I'm too good for that. Absolutely not. I think I mentioned this actually a while ago on a podcast where I said, I actually think some movements you can do on cables and can do on Smith machines are more advanced, because it takes a lot more discipline, takes a lot more ability to hold good form. And you might say, well, how does it take more discipline to hold form with a machine that's fixed? Well, it's easier to get carried away in terms of weight, because you think, hey, this is going to be easy. And actually just thinking, no, I'm going to dial into my quads here. I'm going to put my feet forward a little bit and make sure I get full range of motion and be really strict my pauses, you know. And actually, potentially, if you haven't tried that, maybe it's worth giving it a sail, because it could be an interesting one for you.
Yeah. I think we can tie a bow on the 5 points there.
Absolutely.
And the 5 exercises. As a little bonus for people that have listened this long, you just got me thinking then, when you said about the cables and the machines. What is your honest opinion?
Oh no.
Honest on these people that you see doing squats on a cable while like holding a straight bar out in front of them? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They hold a straight bar out front at like arm's length, and it's on the lower cable. I've even seen people do this with a bar on the upper cable, which we can get into as well if you like. But what's your opinion on them? And if that opinion is negative, then can you explain to people why it's probably not a good idea? So we can talk about a better alternative.
I have some, this is something I actually really do want to do a podcast on, not this specific exercise, but in general. I have some opinions on things that people will hear and be like, oh, this guy's an arse. Like, that's harsh. But the reason is, and this is my defense for what I'm about to say, nothing pisses me off more than when people sell an exercise to someone based on it being like how they got to where they are, or do this to have glutes like me. And I'm thinking, bullshit, you never did that. That's not how you got those glutes. And if it is, well, maybe I'm wrong. Or maybe you have super good genetics. But from my knowledge and from science, that just isn't an effective way to do what you're doing. It's just that you've made it look more fun so that people engage with you on Instagram. So that's my first rant. And the thing that annoys me about that is that people spend their hard-earned money on doing these things, buying these guides, or investing something that they can never get back, and that's time. You can never get time back. So when I see people really flogging these types of things to people, and they're like, oh yeah, great, this looks great, and it just turns out to be a bit shit, I get really annoyed, because I think you've just wasted not only someone's time in watching your video, but then you've gone and told someone to go and do something which is just factually crap. And you can tell I'm getting annoyed here now, because it annoys me that people put their effort into it. You know, I'm a true believer in that if you get someone who's in the state of change, who's ready to make a change in their fitness life, whether that's fat loss, whether that's stopping smoking, drinking, gaining some muscle, maybe they needed to put on some weight, you know, any of those things. If you get someone in that state of change and you are someone who is reaching out to these people, you have a responsibility to do right by that person. And that's giving them a fast track method to where they need to go. And I'm not saying that fat loss is a fast track thing or that muscle gain is a fast track thing, but selling or giving out things which directly isn't what helps is something that really irritates me, because I think I feel sorry for that person.
The best path for them, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely it is. And, you know, when you see, you know, people tell me this stuff all the time. I don't know why. Maybe it's because they like seeing my reaction. I don't know. But, you know, people say to me, oh, did you ever get your phone out when you were PTing and like be on Instagram or something. And this is categorically never something I did. I would have had my phone on me on one or two occasions if there was an emergency, and I would have said to one of my clients, if my phone rings, I'm really very sorry, but I'm going to have to answer it because I need to. But it's the same thing, you know, someone's invested their time and their money in your services. If you're just there flicking through Instagram, just 2 more reps, then brilliant. Yeah, why are you there? Why are you doing that? And to come back full circle to your exercise, there are mechanical ways of making this exercise effective. There are. You can make it effective to an extent. You know, you can change the angles, you can change if you've got your feet up, your heels up, and potentially you can get some good work done from it. You know, if you are stood on a box, for example, and you have the angle of the cable a lot lower than where you are, so it effectively works as almost a belt squat, just you don't have the belt.
Yeah, but then, mate, as soon as you start loading that with any sort of decent weight, you're going to be flying off the box. And if you're not flying off the box, you're probably going way too light.
But this is my next point, and that is that the chances are, if they've given you this exercise as exercise number 1, they have no idea what they're talking about. I'm just going to say in my opinion there before I get done for slander on someone. But that's just my opinion. And the second thing is, if they've put it at the end of the workout, is that just junk volume? Because we've just named 5 things, and I'm not saying that we're perfect or that we're always right, but there's an inordinate amount of very good exercises that you could be doing. And if you are doing something that's potentially wasting your time, I'm a bit like, come on, why? You know, if you come to me and you say, hey, I love this exercise, I get really good engagement from it, I would probably put that in as some extra volume. I wouldn't use it as my main precursor, because I'd be thinking to myself, I know what we can really get some work done with. I'll put that in because you enjoy it, and I'm not here to tell you, and be some kind of dictator. You must do this. But I also wouldn't be necessarily counting it towards your volume as an effective exercise, because I don't truly believe that it is.
Yeah, so I think I'd say in terms of the exercise itself, you're probably going to end up going really light with it. If you're going super heavy, as we said, the cable and the weight is just going to end up pulling you forward and throwing you off, so you're not going to be able to load it to the level where you should. I think it also reinforces a really bad squat pattern in terms of movement, because you see people trying to sink back into the squat as their arms are like reaching out in front of them. And so they're kind of pulling their whole thoracic like over, and the shoulders are rounding as the bar's going forwards. And they're trying to sit back into the squat, which doesn't help you at all when it comes to like good front squat positioning, good back squat positioning, good goblet squat positioning, or anything like that. And all in all, you're just not going to be getting good use of your time in the gym when you only have a finite amount of time, a finite amount of volume that you can do in a week and in a session. I think there is only very, very, very rare cases where you could justify having something like a straight bar cable squat from the bottom cable. And then I don't think you could ever justify having it from the top cable. When I saw someone doing that, I was just at a loss.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. The only way I can see this working, hear me out, is if you strapped your feet into the floor and somehow used your hamstrings to pull you down.
Pull you back down.
Get you some kind of standing hamstring curl.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other reasons why that would be effective.
No, you have to think about where the weight's pulling from, what muscles is that actually working or not. And like we said over a few podcasts now, if you know the muscle and you know what that muscle is trying to do in order to get stimulated and move weight, then you can pretty quickly work out which exercises are terrible and which exercises are going to work effectively.
Absolutely. I think on that note, Jack, we'll leave these lovely people with our rant. Hope you guys have a fantastic day. Thanks ever so much again for joining us, Jack. We really do appreciate you as always. Have a good one, guys. Speak soon. Take care now. Bye-bye.